Phil. I have the great honor, pleasure to maintain this conversation, this recording conversation with you on this morning. And let me introduce you on this way. You are very known as the director of the Institute for Jewish Catholic Relations at the St. Joseph's University, as the past president of the International Council for Christians and Jews, and you got an honorary position in the same institution, the International Council for Christians and Jews. With God help, the next October 31st, you are going to be bestowed with a special distinction with the Shevet Achim award. But beside all that, if I being asked to give my opinion, my definition, who is Phil Cunningham, Professor Phil Cunningham, I would say that you are one of the most important and relevant doers, worldly speaking, for the real development, the deep development, the required development of the Catholic, or I would enlarge that, Christian Jewish dialogue approach. And when I say dialogue, I mean this word in the very, very deep sense of it. So when someone of us are looking on your curriculum vitae, we can see that you devoted all your career, and I know that from for personal talkings, that you devoted all your career to this theme, the Jewish Catholic dialogue. Why? Why?
Well, first, let me thank you for those overly generous terms with which you introduced me. I wondered if you were speaking about somebody else for a moment, but thank you very much for the compliments. It is true that I've been working in the realm of Christian-Jewish relations for a while now. And I don't really have a specific incident or decision at a fixed point in time when I said, I am now going to focus academic work on Christian-Jewish relations. It was a gradual process. I think the fact that I grew up in New York City in a largely Irish and Italian Catholic and Jewish neighborhood in Queens at the time of the Second Vatican Council and Nostra Aetate surely has shaped who I am as a person. I'm a child of the Second Vatican Council, and the changes that the council initiated in terms of relations with non-Catholics are huge, and I'm part of that process that the council began and which is still unfolding today.
Where are we standing in the dialogue? We reached a lot, but I asked, interesting, I asked the first question is I asked to all the people, the Catholic people that the Christian people, because one of the interviews was with the head of the church, of the Dutch church. And the great majority of them, I would say almost all of them, gave the same answer. That they lived in a neighborhood and have in a neighborhood in which also Jewish families lived and the relationship with them, for instance, Pawlikowski and many others. The second point that I would like to stress is what I said really were not merely compliments when I defined your doings, because I know from first hand your fight in order to go ahead with the dialogue. During the first 50 years, okay, occurred after Nostra Aetate, occurred great advancement. And continuously we have great advancements in the approach between Jews and the Catholic Church. But where we are standing.
Well, so there's many possible ways to approach answering that question. Let me choose this way. First of all, I think it has to be said that in terms of Catholic-Jewish relations specifically, that Nostra Aetate occurred in reaction to the Shoah. The fact that in the heart of a continent that had been Christian for centuries, this abomination could occur and was in many cases supported by Christian leaders. At least the regime was supported that undertook the genocide, has to raise deep soul-searching questions on the part of any thoughtful Christian. And the Catholic Church at the Second Vatican Council, although Nostra Aetate makes no mention of the Shoah, it's clear that from the discussions that took place as the various drafts were produced, that this event was in the minds of the Church Fathers. So I say that because there's a certain humility that I think is required because of history. Having said that, I would say that the first couple of decades after the council, so let's say the 1970s into the 1980s, I think it took us Catholics and Jews that were engaged in this work, it took us time to learn how to talk to one another, what we can say to one another. It took time, that's still in process, of building sufficient trust to, as Pope Francis says, lower the defenses and provide warmth to engage in sincere human interaction. We had to go through, and we still are, and this will continue forever because we're all human beings, but we had to experience some conflicts and some controversies over the years and learn that the structures that had developed to promote conversation could withstand those kinds of disagreements, and in fact were the important mechanisms to address conflict. So I'm thinking, for example, of the controversy over the large cross at Auschwitz in the 1980s, several other missteps along the way I don't need to enumerate, but as in any relationship, you have to overcome those inevitable sorts of tensions. And of course, when we're dealing with a relationship that's over 2,000 years old or just up to 2,000 years old, that has largely been a negative one, and we're doing that within living memory of a genocide, of course it's going to be fraught. So that's sort of the intervening decades. I would say that today, in certain parts of the world, that that we Catholics and Jews and other Christians too, I don't mean to exclude anyone when I focus on Catholics, that there has been a level of trust built and a certain familiarity established so that we are now able to speak to one another about deep aspects of our respective faith traditions in ways that literally have never been possible before in history, going all the way back to the late Second Temple period. So, so I think, where we are today is on the threshold of really being able to learn from each other's spiritual traditions in an unprecedented way. There's a certain hesitation that accompanies that possibility, because if we really are speaking to one another at this deep spiritual level, we're not going to be unchanged by the encounter. And it requires both Jews and Catholics and other Christians, I think, to reassess parts of our tradition that have been influenced by our negative history. And therefore, we may need to rethink certain aspects of our religious traditions as this new relationship deepens over time.
Very interesting. When you focused your answer about it's very about the point of the natural way of having conflicts and controversies in the relationships, because this is part of life. When you are sharing life with the other, of course, that there are conflicts and controversies, and we have to resolve them. We have to find the mechanisms. I'm repeating your words, and you used another word that I really do consider that is a key word, to find a new language. The story that we are reading in the Torah this week, tomorrow in the morning, about the flood, about Noah, as we call him in Hebrew. And the end of the story is the end of this parasha. This parasha is with the tower, the description of the whole story of the Tower of Babel. And we have since then, we have to seek in order to discover the real common language of peace, which has the capability to resolve our problems through the word, through the dialogue. So, yeah. Would you
Well,
like to add
I was
something?
going to say, of course, that's all true. But in terms of the Christian-Jewish relationship, there's an additional twist in that we often use the same words, but mean very different things by them in our tradition. And in fact, some of the words we used have been defined deliberately to be in opposition to the other tradition. Just to pick one example, the word Messiah. Jews today and Christians today do not mean the same thing by that word. And in the Christian case, it's really more proper to use the word Christ, because it's our experience as Christians of the one who was crucified and raised as mediating God to us. Well, that's not an experience that Jews share. And so for us to be saying this or that about Messiah without recognizing that that the term has very different cadences and connotations in each tradition makes the conversation more difficult. And again, that's often not the case. Well, in any other interreligious pairing, that's not really the case, that we have common words that have been defined oppositionally to the other and therefore makes the conversation more challenging. That's an added dimension of the Christian-Jewish relationship.
Even though regarding Messiah, we can add one phrase and afterwards we go direct to the next question. We don't know, Jews and Christians don't know exactly the truth. It's only a belief. We believe that the Messiah, which is a absolutely human being, will come in the future. We are waiting, expecting for his coming. And Christians, are seeing on the Messiah as a God human creature, something special, not absolutely human, but human with some special approach to God. But in order to be brief, what it's common for both of us is that we are waiting for the coming of someone who is going to help us to improve the world. This is the common denominator. We are expecting, with all the differences, we are expecting, we are waiting. And the truth, when he will come, he will reveal what the truth is. Okay.
Well, of course, we could now undertake an entire dialogue on what you have just said. I would put things a bit differently, but but we can go on to the next question. But
yeah,
I guess...
no, of course that there are all kind of nuances in order to give us a good and strict definition. This was roughly talking. What we can see is Jews are waiting and expecting, and this is one of the fundaments of our faith, according Maimonides. Yeah, we believe in be'emunah shleima, in the full meaning of emunah lebiat HaMashiach, that the Messiah will come. Okay, we can develop a whole conversation. But the point now that I would like to ask you about is, how is the situation in the United States with the dialogue, with, for instance, the teaching about Jews and Judaism in the Catholic institutions? What do you think that the situation is? What should be done? Because this is the theme of your PhD dissertation.
So again, as with your other questions, there are there's lots of different ways of approaching it. So on the one hand, restricting to the United States, as you asked, Catholic religious materials, public textbooks, catechetical religious ed materials have totally removed explicit concepts that promoted hostility to Jews. I mean, most specifically, the idea that Jews were responsible collectively for the crucifixion of Jesus was present before the Second Vatican Council in some texts. That is now gone. It's just totally removed. This is one of the advantages of having a centralized teaching authority, that when it makes a decision of this type, it can be implemented fairly quickly. That doesn't mean that all of the problems of our past tradition have been resolved, our past teaching tradition have been resolved. There are issues or topics that we need to get into more in our preaching and in our education, particularly, I would say, well, there's several, but let me cluster several of them in terms of what was Jesus's relationship with contemporary Jews in the first century. Was that there's still a prevalent assumption that somehow Jesus was in opposition or in some way distant from or removed from the dynamism of late Second Temple Judaism. In fact, the opposite is the case. He was totally immersed in the kinds of conversations that were going on amongst Jews in the land of Israel at the time. But this instinct, maybe is the word, that we've inherited from the past. I still see too many instances that are inaccurate historically of Jesus being depicted as rejected by Jewish leaders in some religious way, or Jesus himself criticizing Jewish practices in some fundamental way. All of those tropes need to be attended to. The Pharisees as representing everything that was wrong with Judaism from a Christian, perspective. And therefore Pharisees and Jesus constantly being at loggerheads is very much there, and they're out in what's being said. And although there are Catholic teaching documents that state quite explicitly that Jesus was probably closer in his way of thinking to Pharisees than to other Jewish groups at the time, that has not yet permeated into our imaginations when we think about Jesus in the first century. So that's one response to your question of where things stand. We need to do the more detailed work. But I want to say a second thing here as well, and that is on the subject of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, when I use that word, I mean by it a tendency to put Jews in the category of the other, and the dangerous other, or the not to be trusted other, or the one you can't, you have to always be on guard against other. And for various reasons, we won't go into, historically, Christian theology in the patristic era and in the Middle Ages put Jews into that sort of othered category, although permitted them to survive and sometimes thrive in Christian Europe in the Middle Ages. But nonetheless, they were at arm's length, let's say, in the best of times. But what happened later is that othered attitude, that othering attitude, got combined with racialist attitudes that arose. And so now the reason to be suspicious of Jews was not so much what they believe or what they practice or what they reject, namely the Christian gospel, but rather who they are as people, right, on the genetic level, although they wouldn't have used that word in previous centuries. But that, of course, sets up the stage for what the Nazis took advantage of and how they ran with it and so forth. The point I'm trying to make is every Catholic document and every Christian document that I have read in the last 60 years, written in the last 60, 70 years, condemns anti-Semitism and rejects it as unchristian, as even anti-Christian. But it has already, we have an expression, the horse is out of the barn, by which I mean it's out in society that these latent feelings of othering Jews and being suspicious of Jews and conspiracy theories involving Jews is out there outside the church. It's permeated Western culture and perhaps other cultures as well. And so church statements condemning anti-Semitism are of course welcome and must continue. But how do we now get at dealing with anti-Semitism that's permeated the culture beyond Christianity? That's a challenge that's going to remain with us for quite a while and is part of the educational process. And let me end this by this response to your question, just with an anecdote. Almost 20 years ago now, there was a big controversy when Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ, was going to be released, and after it was released, because it represented visually in a Hollywood production some of the medieval passion play characterization of Jews as nefarious and conspiratorial and ganging up to kill Jesus and all of this. And I was teaching with a Jewish colleague at the time about this in classes. And it was interesting that there were students, Catholic students, who had never heard that the Jews had been blamed collectively for the death of Jesus or held responsible collectively as being under a divine curse because of the crucifixion. Never heard that, which is good. I mean, why would we want them to hear that, right? On the other hand, they therefore were unable to recognize that theme, that trope, when it emerged in the context of the release of this Hollywood production. So the lesson that had for my colleagues and myself was that it's not enough for Christians simply to remove these inimical teachings or concepts. We also have to be honest and explain, this is what we used to teach, here's why it was wrong, and here's what we believe today. In order, if I can use a medical analogy in this time, we almost have to inoculate our students against the traces of anti-Semitism or the characteristics of anti-Semitism by informing them what it was all about and that it had some connection to Christian teaching.
So it's possible to deduce from your words a very great idea, a very great concept, that the challenge for Christians is not only to erase, to modify, to put in clear all the concepts, the wrong concepts that from the past pave a view, a very negative view about the Jew, but it's using a Hebrew concept. It's a mitzvah for the Christians to fight in order to change this situation. And you use, as far as I understood, a very interesting concept. The permeation of all those prejudices that the polemics in the past with the Jews and all the controversies and all the what we know and all the books written with hate against the Jews introduce into the culture, not only into the religion, but into the culture. So it's a very, 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 very interesting explanation. We can understand how it was a connection between racism and anti-Semitism. It was one step further. It's not only that they rejected the Son of God, they are really uh, bad people, very bad people. I don't know exactly, Rick people who, because they did that. It's not only a matter of beliefs, it's a matter of the nature of the Jews. So, you know that for us Jews at large, and especially in our days, it's very important what is going on in Christianity at large. Why? As you very well know, one of the inspiring articles, or one of the articles that inspired me a lot in order to engage myself with the theme is the very famous article of Abraham Yeshua Heschel, No Religion is an Island. And what he says is that, as you well remember, we have to work together in order to put at the center of our civilization the Bible, the concepts of the Bible, the spirituality of the Bible. And in our culture, in our Yiddish language, there is a saying, as it are going on things in Christianity, so the things will go on with us, because there, in some way, there is a mutual influence from one to the others, on the others. So what is the situation of Catholicism? Because your expertise is in Catholicism. What is the situation of the church today? A short view. The situation, I mean, we are reading, for instance, about all the bad things of people of the church in the past, and we are seeing, for instance, in Latin America, the shrinking of the churches. So, what do you suppose should be the next steps in order to transform the church in something, as Pope Francis dreamt with that, at something vital, something vibrant, but an institution which really gives a strong spiritual message for humanity, not only for Christians. This is a theme that on some opportunities I spoke with my good friend, Pope Francis, even when he was Archbishop in Buenos Aires, and I said when he was elected Pope that this is his challenge as Pope, and I suppose that he's working on that way. But how do you see what is possible to do? What are you expecting? What is your wish to be done on that sense?
So I'm glad you paused there, because you were multiplying the questions and possible answers the more you were speaking. Let me begin with Abraham Joshua Heschel, with which you began, and the very almost iconic essay he wrote, No Religion is an Island. So let me just make this comment, and you'll see how it connects to your larger question. I think that the relationship theologically and communally between Catholics and Jews has gone beyond no religion is an island. In some ways, and I'm probably not doing his insights full justice, Rabbi Heschel's, in some ways, he appealed to a sort of common denominator amongst all peoples, amongst all humans, and amongst their religious traditions, and emphasized rightly that we can enrich one another by coming to understand one another's religious heritages in an open, honest, friendly way. I would add to that, and I don't, I'm sure he would not disagree. In fact, he probably says it elsewhere, that between Christians and Jews in particular, there is a religious and certainly historical affinity that multiplies the enrichment that is possible for us to have toward each other. In other words, our experiences of God are shared to such a degree, obviously with differences, that that we can learn more from each other than we can perhaps from other religious traditions separately. And lots more could be said about that. You know, the sculpture that you were involved at St. Joseph's showing synagogue and ecclesia, synagogue and church studying texts together, illustrates this point that I want to make. And again, I know Rabbi Heschel would agree with that, but I'm kind of focused on that particular bilateral relationship. Okay, having said that, now the church writ large today, let me say a couple of things. One, let's go to the very beginning of Nostra Aetate, the opening sentences. In terms of relations with Jews, we always talk about the fourth paragraph of Nostra Aetate, which specifically talks about Jews and Judaism. But the first sentences, the first section, paragraph, opens by saying words to the effect, this is not a direct quote, but words to the effect that the church, along with all human beings, is constantly striving with profound questions of existence. Where do I come from? What is our purpose? What is the meaning of life? Why death? And you know, these perennial human questions is where Nostra Aetate opens, and then proceeds to talk about religious traditions as arenas where these questions are dealt with and have been dealt with by various branches of humanity over the centuries. Now, sometimes it's overlooked that this is a very important sort of shift in perspective in the part of Catholic texts. I'm overgeneralizing when I say what I'm about to say, but typically before that point, Catholic documents began more with, we have received from God revelation. We have received truths about the human condition, about what God wants for humanity, etc. And it is our role as church to pass that along to the rest of humanity that has not received that revelation. We're sort of doling out these key insights. Nostra Aetate didn't begin there with saying the church possesses the fullness of revelation that we'll, try and impart to others. It began with all human beings are struggling with questions that are perennial, that are constant. And so the whole approach then to the rest of humanity is we're all in this boat together, and we have things to share in this ongoing human enterprise. In other words, there is a fundamental humility that's present that has the capacity of opening bridges to other portions of the human race that might not be able to be engaged with if the approach were, we have the truth and you don't. So I want to bring that then to the church today in a broad sense. We Catholics have every reason to feel pretty humble with the revelations of the sexual abuse crises that only a few days ago, revelations in terms of the history in France of this, and of course it's the United States, it's Ireland, it's you name it. This is a problem. Issues of financial problems within certain Catholic institutions. We could go down a list. We have a lot of soul searching to do within our community, relations with other religions among them, that requires us to be humble. I mean, it's that there's no other way to honestly engage with these things. So that's I guess, we're realizing slowly, perhaps, we're realizing as a community that that we must rely on God to give us the humility to honestly face these questions. At the same time, we're living in a world in which there are people who are deliberately seeking to polarize societies, to set people against one another in dichotomous ways. That's also happening within the church, that you have certain Catholics who have brought into the inner Catholic conversation this polarizing mentality, and whose main manifestation is in ad hominem attacks against other people, against other Catholics. And sort of ironically, Pope Francis has, from the beginning of his pontificate, has been encouraging dialogue and conversation within the church as well as external to the church. And some people have really taken him up on this and have engaged in ad hominem attacks against him because they disagree with this or that thing that he has said. So there's no humility there, right? If one feels, well, I am going to just attack that position because it is betraying the faith or is heretical, or that person is, leading us to the paths of perdition or something, that's exactly opposite what we need at this time. What we need is humility, not aggressive offensiveness. And so we're caught up in that, just like the larger society is. But of course, it plays out differently in a religious context where we, in theory, all share the same faith and therefore should be all living in a way that enables and empowers other people, not destroys them. So that's in a nutshell. So you asked a cosmic question, so I'm sorry for the lengthy answer, but those are the main forces I would point to.
Phil, a great answer. For me, you built up this answer on a very accurate way, giving a key word, humility, and humility in all the senses of the word. A very good answer. My dear Phil, you were the creator of the project of the statue in St. Joseph's University. Today, we can say that this is an icon, really, for the dialogue, internationally recognized, because a lot of publications are using this image as an icon. And also people who are not so humble, are not so people in whom humility is not just a virtue. They are, as we saw in the last weeks, they are criticizing this statue. But this statue is great. Thanks. The project was a great project and was realized in a great way by Kaufman. So this is my last commentary.
I'd like to comment on what you just said.
Yeah,
though,
please.
If I might.
Please.
So, of course, I don't know if viewers of this recording know about the synagogue and ecclesia in our time sculpture, which shows the feminine figures of church and synagogue not as enemies or one being conquered by the other, but rather as learning from one another's sacred text. So since I know you've interviewed my mentor, Dr. Mary Boyes, as in this series of recordings.
Yes.
Let me indicate that it was one of her books where she said we need to rethink these images of synagogue and church, of synagoga and ecclesia, and commissioned one of the members of her religious community of women to craft statuettes of synagoga ecclesia where they were both proudly holding symbols of their traditions, and neither, one wasn't beating up on the other.
on the same level, the same
equal
level. Right.
Both
of the queens are sitting on the same chair.
So when we wanted to commission a sculpture along the lines of what does Nostra Aetate call us to, Joshua Kaufman, the sculptor, presented little clay models of various approaches. And I have to say that the whole project also was informed in my collaboration with Dr. Adam Gregerman, who works with me at the Institute, co-directing it. Joshua Kaufman presented one little image out of clay, it's amazing, of two women who were just sort of reclining and chatting with one another. And we realized what's needed is that synagoga and ecclesia be interacting. And that's what the sculpture does, taking the words of Pope Francis, that there is a rich complementarity between the church and the Jewish people that allows us to mine the riches of God's word, the scriptures, together. That's the message for the future. That's where we've got to be going. And you obviously were instrumental in helping us realize the sculpture and its dedication and the Pope's visit. But that is where the relationship must continue to go. It's, yes, we've got to combat anti-Semitism. Yes, we have to deal with the history of the past. But the bigger thing is that we have so much that we can learn about God from each other. That's the positive thing that we must keep pursuing. And as a Catholic, as a Christian, I have to say, that's required of us because of who we are as followers of the gospel. This positive engagement with other brothers and sisters who are covenanting with the same God that we do. That's where that's the image that we should always hold up in front of us, I think.
Dear Phil, thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, and personally talking, for your friendship.
Absolutely, likewise. Thank you. I've learned so much from you.